Chris, welcome to ETHDenver.
Hello, it's great to be here.
I think he's on the ground for 5 hours, flew in and out to be a part of the ETHDenver community. I want to get right into one question that I keep coming back to, and that's whether VCs have been bad for crypto. And what I mean by that is that, we're coming out of a real low for VC funding of crypto projects, but during the last bull cycle, I feel like VCs contributed to a lot of froth. Now, do you think that that froth was a good thing, or this time around, are you thinking differently about the strategy when it comes to investing in the space?
Can you all hear me? Yeah, I guess that's loud, okay. So, my view of it is, I'm obviously very biased. I work in venture capital. I used to be an entrepreneur, and I raised venture capital. And my view is that, first of all, a lot of people get lumped in as VCs who do different things. We've been in the space for 10 years. We've been very consistently investing. We invested, through every winter. We've supported our companies through that. So I would argue, I'm biased, I get that, but I would argue that sort of VCs who have actual conviction in blockchain and crypto can play an important role. That said, there's, like anything, there's all sorts of different people. There's people that trade more, that, our approach is our funds are 10 years long, and we invest generally pretty early, and we have a very long holding period, and we try to do a lot to help the projects that we're involved with. And I think there's a bunch of other VCs who do that, and I think those are the good ones and they're helpful, but there's also, a whole wide range of different types of behavior.
So, Bitcoin and Ether are way up, but do you even care? I'm thinking about the last few days, and every single conversation I've had on the ground here has been about Denkun and an imminent upgrade to the Ethereum blockchain. It's been about excitement in the builder space. Nobody has talked about spot Ether ETFs. Yeah. So, does that factor into the way that you think about investments or your optimism around crypto?
I think, so first of all, I think it's awesome. This kind of ETHDenver and generally the Ethereum community is an awesome community, and especially because it's so focused on real software and building, and I think that's to me the most important thing. Having been in technology for a long time, what really matters is building applications, building infrastructure. This is how we, I think what we all want to do is make this movement go mainstream. Not prices, but my kind of North Star is how do we get an application to 100 million users, to 1 billion users. I think that's how most people here think. That said, I go to DC a lot. Obviously, there's all these regulatory questions that we're all dealing with. And I think for us who've been in the space a long time, we see this is probably the fourth cycle or something if you've been in Bitcoin and things like I have for 10 plus years. A lot of people outside, in DC and Hollywood, to them, crypto started in 2021. I'll just tell you this because I talked to them. They'd heard of Bitcoin and things, but the real thing started in 2021 with NFTs and just all the kind of this talk in 21 and 22. And then FTX happened, Luna happened, and interest rates went up, and the narrative became crypto's over. It was this thing that popped up and then it ended. And that has had an effect on the policymakers, because a lot of them, they literally will say, this is this thing that happened during COVID with low interest rates, and now it's going to go away. And we say to them, no, it's not going to go away. Instead, you have to think about this and grapple with it and come up with smart policy that maximizes the good and minimizes the bad. So I do think, in the sense that it kind of reminds people this is not going away and that it's a real thing, and that I think what people underestimate is there's all of you and me, and I think probably a few million people who are true believers, who believe in this movement, who believe in building digital services that are owned by communities that honor user ownership and creator ownership and all these other things. And I think a lot of people who don't come here and don't see this. By the way, I think it's awesome that you're here, because I think most media doesn't cover these things and they just talk about the prices. But I think for those people that don't see this, they don't understand that this is a real tech movement, right? And so it's important to remind people it's a real tech movement and it's not going away. And we're not focused on prices, but that prices do have that effect, and it does remind people of that.
So you just wrote a book. It's called Read, Write, Own, Building the Next Era of the Internet. And he's doing a book signing after this. I'm giving him a plug right now if you want to go talk to him afterwards. For those of you who haven't read it, it's a very good introduction of a complex idea, sort of a history of the internet and looking at how Web3 is a solid alternative to big tech. Before we dig into it, why write a book? Like, why not? You know, it seems like kind of buttoned up a corporate thing to do. Why that instead of something more decentralized?
Like my friends, were like, why don't you self-publish? Why don't you just do blog posts? It's like old-fashioned to write a book. I thought, we've been doing podcasts and blog posts for years. The reality is there's a lot of people, including policymakers and just other folks who want a book. Like a book is an API to a certain segment of the world. It's kind of how I think about it. And literally, I'd go to all these meetings and they'd say, what book should I read? And I was like, there's some great books on Bitcoin and Coinbase history and stuff like this, but I didn't think there was a book that kind of frankly described the vision here. I think Ethereum is the most aligned vision to my book. And so I really felt like no one had written the book like that kind of contextualized all of this in the history of the internet. And really, it took me forever to write the book. I don't know if it's worth it to write a book, but I did it. But the work I did, a lot of the work I did was to make it really just accessible. And so, for example, instead of saying, I don't use the word decentralized very much because that's kind of a technical word, slightly technical word. Instead, I really try to explain through examples that non-technical people can understand why that matters. So decentralization really means decentralization of software production, which is composability. It's a decentralization of economics, which is take rates. And so anyway, each chapter kind of goes through why does this matter to you? So what I'm hoping is, and I feel like it's happening, is that hopefully all of you folks like it. Obviously you'll know parts of the book already, maybe some of section. I wrote it with chunks so you can jump around. Probably everyone here knows the blockchain section. I hope the history might be interesting to you. I hope some of the later sections might be. But really I wrote it so that you would have a book to give to your family and friends when they say, isn't crypto that thing that's scammers and whatever? And no, it's actually this whole other side of it. Here's this book. That's what I'm hoping it becomes, is a book that you can hand to somebody and explain to them. And they don't have to come away oh my God, I'm going to quit my job and do this and devote my life to it. But at least they can understand that there's another side to the story, right? Because that, I didn't feel like that was getting told.
You make this analogy of crypto as the casino and how that kind of obscures some of the larger use cases. But isn't that part of what has helped the industry scale a little bit? This get rich quick scheme, this idea that you could be a part of something big, you could make it. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think it's a question of emphasis. So the way I think of it is ownership is a key aspect to that's what tokens enable ownership. And whether an NFT enables ownership of a digital object, a fungible token enables ownership of something more money-like. I would sort of analogize it to the housing market, where in the housing market, you have people that flip houses and you have people that trade and things like this, but why do we want home ownership as a society? We want home ownership as a society not for that reason. We want it because it's important psychologically. You can raise a family in your home. It's important to align incentives. It's well documented that people that own homes contribute more to their home and their community. So my argument, and then as a side effect of that, right, we have trading and speculation, and that does play a role, right? It's the reason you can go get a Zestimate on Zillow is because there's a liquid market. I'm not anti-liquid markets. The United States is generally the regulatory framework in the United States has generally supported regulated markets and speculation and other things. It does serve a purpose in providing liquidity and price discovery. But my argument is just that that's been all of the emphasis from kind of a media point of view, and that should be the side effect, right? The core thing should be about ownership, empowering users, empowering developers, empowering creators through a new architecture of digital services, right? That shifts ownership to the edges of the network.
Web3 folks have been accused of being super hand-wavy and not very specific in terms of what Web3 is actually accomplishing right now. Jack Dorsey, Elon Musk, two big critics of Web3. Yeah. And I know that was one of the things that you were looking to combat in your book. And you have these actionable takeaways, real-world examples of things that are really working right now. Yeah. And you have so many developers and builders in the audience. I think they'd be keen to kind of hear what you think is tech that's working but also needs to be scaled.
Yeah, sorry. My view, I've been working on the internet for almost 25 years now. I really started my career in earnest during the internet downturn, which it's easy now to sort of dismiss that as like, oh, it was obvious the internet was going to be a big thing. It was not obvious. It was very much of a downturn. These things just take, in my experience, these things take a long time. So AI, the first neural network paper was 1943. I actually personally started an AI company in 2008. I thought that machine learning was going to happen then. I was 15 years too early. Smartphones go back to the 80s and 90s. Internet goes back. Go look up CompuServe and Prodigy. These were big internet services in the 80s. Internet goes back to the 60s. So these things take time. I think we were really set back by some of the stuff that, like the FTX stuff and everything else. I think that on the positive side, like the folks here know, I think there's a lot of really good stuff going on the infrastructure side, which just frankly wasn't quite there yet. You need low gas fees and great UX and embedded wallets, 4844, like all these kinds of things are important. And then you need applications, and there's a whole bunch of people, I'm sure many here, who are building a whole wave of new exciting applications. And look, I think also some of these things have been like the death of NFTs has been exaggerated. There were, I think, 8.6 billion in sales last year of NFTs. After the downturn, stablecoins have become, I think are kind of sneaking up on people. I think it was 600 billion last month in stablecoin transactions. And then there's a whole wave of emerging applications. People here, some of you might be on Farcaster. I was talking to some of you earlier probably. It's a new social network built on Ethereum. There's a whole bunch of games and other kind of exciting things. So look, in my ideal world, it would have been faster, but I also think that just because something's taking longer doesn't mean it won't happen.
Yeah, I think that stablecoins are especially interesting in certain emerging markets where the bank rate is so off of the black market. It's just helping to fuel a shadow economy that's absolutely vital to survival.
Yeah, it's harder to see in the U.S. because we have we have easy access to the dollar and good payment systems. But I think around the world, it solves much more of a problem.
Yeah. One critique of a16z that I've seen lately relate to some comments that you made to the New York Times that your projects aren't allowed to sell tokens publicly. Some say that, well, you've got Axie Infinity, that's an exception with the token that they issue. Any response to that or that narrative?
Well, I think the comment I made was that they were talking about ICOs, I believe. I did a lot of podcasts, so I don't remember everything I said, but the ICOs, which were, in the 2017-18 era when people were kind of launching and selling tokens directly to the market, and the SEC came out with guidance that guided against that, and that basically ended. And so, we haven't been involved. The norm now for projects, I mean, you can debate whether this is good or bad from a societal point of view, but the norm is to raise money from exempted institutions like VCs, and then later on to airdrop tokens to regular users, but not to sell them directly. And that's been that's how I think I think every project we've been involved with has done that. So anyway, so I think it's just a misunderstanding. That did happen with projects in 2017 and 18, but the SEC guided against it, and people since then have raised money from institutions and then airdrop. So people can still get tokens, but they get them for free for doing work, for contributing to the network, as opposed to buying them, which I think is just also a much better way to have a happy community too.
You told Kara Swisher that 94% of your portfolio is locked up, meaning you haven't sold the tokens associated with your portfolio companies.
It's not locked up, but we haven't sold it. Yeah.
Haven't sold it, okay. I mean, it must have been a rough couple years. But what's your thinking, though, about because I know it's a part of the term sheets, you have certain lockup windows, and that's not required by any sort of larger regulator. So what's your philosophy behind that?
I mean, this is just based on, so this is not new to crypto. I think people may not realize this about venture capital in general, which is if you go look at all of our funds, I have the data for all of a16z funds, the way it works is you have this J curve, right? So you invest and then the value of the fund drops almost invariably. And I've seen a lot of data from a lot of venture firms. That's why it's called a J curve, because it drops and then it goes up. And just basically universally, the biggest mistake a VC can make is to, when things start to work, sell them too early, right? All of the value in venture capital that's ever been created in the history of venture capital has been basically years 6 through 12 in the portfolio, right? And so you can just, and every LP will tell you this, all the data analysis, so it's just kind of widely understood in the venture world. And you do, yes, you do, it does go down, and if it's a little harrowing at times, because, you know, like, you can tell yourself, hey, it's a J-curve, but like stuff goes down. But like, so this is not some like altruistic theory. This is just kind of standard venture capital, which is like, these projects take a long time to build, and you know, when they work, sometimes, you know, many won't work, but occasionally they'll work, and when they work really well, they just kind of start compounding.
Yeah, I mean,
so you wouldn't want to sell them.
Yeah, I do feel like it's in contrast to like this other narrative that's out there, like that some people just think that, you know, you got VCs that'll invest in projects and they kind of exit the token when it's at peak value, and then retail is kind of plowed in money, and you know, it's a troubling dynamic that some people point to, just generally of the VC world, which seems to be in contrast.
I mean,
to...
the thing is, there's a lot of different stuff that goes on out there. I mean, I think that there needs to be, I don't know if this will be controversial here or not, I don't know, but like our view is there needs to be regulatory kind of frameworks around this, including things like lockups and disclosures and other things. There needs to be a path, and we've said this for many years, 5, 6 years, long before like kind of the scandals and things. Very importantly, we believe there needs to be a path for you to create a project, and for, you know, every project by definition starts off centralized. So did Bitcoin was, you know, go read the Satoshi emails. That was one person building a project. Over time, these projects, if they're built properly, become decentralized, and that changes the regulatory classification. There needs to be, we believe, a path to get there, a very clear path, because everyone here, I'm sure, wants to be compliant, right? But that path can include things, and should include things like lockups, disclosures, you know, required security audits. Like there should be things in there, and that would have the other benefit, I think, for the regulators, is that then they would have very clear black and white rules, and if someone's over the line, you can go after them. And but every entrepreneur we work with is dying for this, because they want to all do the right thing. They just need to know what it is. Right, and right now it's the strategy of the policymakers of some of them to deliberately make the line gray so that people don't know. Right, so you know, so like we're one firm in the market. We can't impose rules on the market. Like if we do that, people won't work with us. Like we can only ask for certain things. Some of this needs to come from the referees, so to speak. Right, like
in terms of kind of shifting focus in terms of your investments, I feel like all the VC dollars have dried up for crypto in the last few years, and generative AI is like the new popular kid in the room. But I bring that up in the context of, I believe something like 25% of your investments are in the creator economy space. And, you know, kind of is more important than ever to come up with new business models for creatives.
Yeah.
So I think that's an interesting strategy choice. Can you walk me through how your thinking has evolved in lockstep with the surge in popularity in AI?
Yeah, I talk about this some in my book, in the last third of the book. So the first third is like history, the kind of history of the internet. Next third is kind of about blockchains and the benefits of blockchain-based services. And the last third are 7 different application areas, two or three of which are kind of social media and creator economy, that kind of thing. And so I think it's a really important area. Look, I mean, what's about to happen, right, is the cost to create video, images, text is about to, if not already, drop to zero with generative AI, and that will create the need for new business models if you're a creative person. And so, like one example I talk about in the book, it's a really exciting idea, I think, is what some people call collaborative storytelling. And so this is the idea of a bunch of people getting together and collaboratively creating the next Harry Potter or Star Wars universe, getting rewarded for their contribution with tokens, and then having an incentive to go out and evangelize and contribute and build out and fork. And so, you know, we have a few portfolio companies doing that. That's just one example. There's many great ideas. I'm sure people here are working on them, some of them, of like, what do? You know, have musicians can sell digital collectibles to their audience. So in a world where content goes to zero, what you need are sort of complementary business models, other things that you can sell, right? Other ways to engage your audience and have a financial relationship with your audience, which I think is incredibly important, because like, do we want like right now, if we don't have new business models, like if you look at the way things are headed right now, we've got 5 companies that control the internet essentially by all the data. I have stats in the book. And AI is probably going to increase that centralization because it rewards companies with large stockpiles of data and capital and compute. So what, take Stack Overflow. So I used to be on the board of Stack Overflow. The Stack Overflow has this great programmer content. The AI systems went and used it in their training, and then they have Copilot, and now Stack Overflow's traffic is down 50%. Like, that's the canary in the coal mine. That's going to happen throughout the internet, right? All of these sites that were used for training data are now going to become irrelevant because you can just go to one of these 5 big internet services and get a photo, get an image, get a movie, and you don't need to click through and go to those sites anymore. So my argument is we need new incentive systems, right? Like, do we want a world where there's 5 services, or do we want a world where there's a diverse ecosystem of creators and people building audiences? And that question comes down to incentives, right? And crypto's very good at creating new incentives. So I think this should be a golden period where people are like, okay, we need to now go and rethink how the incentives on the internet work and make sure that we keep the internet open and diverse and kind of aligned with the original ideals of the internet. That's why I got involved in the internet. The reason I probably wouldn't be in technology, I don't think, if it weren't for the 90s internet and the idea, this dream of an open, decentralized network that anyone could build on was an inspiring vision, and I would love to see it return to that. And I think if we don't have new systems like blockchain-based systems, we're at risk of having sort of an internet of, like, what's that movie, WALL-E? It's like the 5 companies and you plug your brain into it, and it's just like dystopian and not the internet that I want to see.
Very, very last question, because we're over time. There are a lot of builders in this audience. 2 things for you. What do you want to see them build, and how do they reach you directly to pitch you?
I'm actually Chris at a16z. It's super easy. So, and I generally, I'll respond in some way. If not directly, I'll introduce you to somebody. But I think this is my favorite. The reason I came here is I think there's so much great developer energy here and a lot of friends and a lot of projects we're involved with, and so I'm very excited about all the things that the Ethereum community is doing. And I would just love to see more interesting products, games, social networks, things that aren't speculative. I think there's all these interesting other features of blockchain networks, like composability, the fact that you can have developers all kind of coming to, you're seeing some of that with like frames on Farcaster, but like there's a whole interesting product space that I don't think has been fully explored. There's the tokens and meme coins, people have explored that. Like, let's go explore all the other things. Like, I would love to see, and I'm not saying, again, the tokens are part of this, and I have chapters in the book on it, but there's a whole other world out there of non-speculative use cases that I think a lot of people here are working on, and I would love to see more development there. Thank
you, Chris. Thank you to everyone who joined us and to the ETHDenver Festival for having us.
Thanks.